Welcome back. So we know about prototypal inheritance in JavaScript, and we can use that to our advantage to move a little bit closer towards object-oriented programming. We want to solve this issue of having same functionality on multiple objects. How can we share that? Before we get to prototypal inheritance, there is one way of just doing this manually, right? I can simply take out this function, and this function at the top can be placed in some sort of a store that we have common functionality. For example, I can do const elf functions, and I can even call this elf function stores or store. And in here, I can just simply have attack and do something like this, so that I have a simple object that has the attack method on it. And all I need to do now to give the attack ability to Peter and Sam is to add a line here that says Peter.attack is going to equal the elf functions.attack. And then same with Sam, we'll do the same thing. We'll say sam.attack. So we're adding a new property onto Sam. And that property is going to equal the elf functions.attack. Now, if I run this, I get an error. Weapon is not defined. Because, well, this elf functions object has no idea what weapon is, right? So how can we refer to the object that's calling us? Remember, who's calling us? Well, the object to the left of the dot, right? So in this case, it'll be this dot weapon. Who's calling us? Sam is calling us, or Peter is calling us. If I run this, all right, everything is working. Sam can now attack with fire. And that's not too bad, right? We have shared functionality here, but it's still a lot of manual work. JavaScript gives us a nice little tool for us to make this a lot easier on ourselves. We can do something called object.create, which we've seen in the previous sections. With object.create, I can clean this up a bit. Instead of having to manually attach these methods onto each elf, remember, if we had 1,000 elves, that's going to be a lot of work. Instead, I'm going to remove these lines of code and use object.create to create that link, that prototype chain between these two parts of the code. And the way we can do that is fairly simple. We can say new elf is going to equal object.create, and object create is going to take, well, what do we want to create an object from? We want to create an object from this elf function store, which is an object. This could probably be named a little bit better because it is confusing. It's an object, even though I call it elf functions. So maybe we can say store here. But for now, let's leave it the way it is, elf functions. So I'm going to create an object from the elf function, and I'm going to assign that to new elf. So let's just say let new elf. From here, this new elf, we can attach the name and weapon property. So let's do new elf.name is going to equal the parameter name that we receive, and new elf, make sure I spell that right, new elf.weapon is going to equal weapon parameter that we receive. And then finally, we want to return the new elf from here. Let's see if that works. If I run this, look at that, it's working. Let's console log this just so we can see both of these in action. And console log here as well. If I run this, look at that. Attack with stone, attack with fire. Both Peter and Sam have the attack method. And why were we able to do that? Well, because we used object.create. What object.create does is it creates a link between the elf functions and the new elf that we just created. We're doing prototypal inheritance here. If I console log new elf here and I run this, I see that it creates an empty object for me. But where is this attack? Remember, this is an object. So if I do dot underscore underscore proto to see what's up the prototype chain, I get attack. So object.create creates this prototype chain for us, all the way up so that we can use attack. Very, very cool. All right, so object.create solved all of our problems. Everything is working now. We are done, right? Here's the thing. What we're doing with object.create is true prototypal inheritance. It's meant to be used like this. The code is a little bit cleaner now. We have less lines of code, and I personally really like this. However, you won't see this out in most code bases. I wouldn't say this is very standard or accepted by the JavaScript community as a whole. Now, I don't want to get into a philosophical debate here, but our goal in this section is to get closer and closer to object-oriented programming. And the thing is, what we're doing here isn't necessarily object-oriented programming yet. You'll see why in a second. What I'm going to show you in the next video is actually something that we had before object.create, that programmers used before we even had this ability. Because some people really didn't like the look of what I'm about to show you next. So keep this in mind, and in the next video, we'll see how we can get closer to object-oriented programming and not use object.create. And don't worry, we'll come back to this and look at some of the pros and cons. I'll see you in the next one.